Hereditary was directed by Aster and stars Gabriel, Byrne, Toni, Collette, Millie Shapiro and Alex Wolff as a very unusual, kind of dysfunctional family who are dealing with grief in a multitude of ways. Before I begin, this is going to be a spoiler review. I will be breaking down the events that happen throughout the film, so just a heads up in case you haven't seen this film, there are spoilers ahead. So the film begins after the death of Ellen, which is Annie's mother. In Annie's eulogy, she explains that her relationship with her mother was very distant and full of problems, and also that her mother was very secretive. Later, Annie attends a support group for people who are experiencing loss, and it's there that she gives the audience a little bit of a glimpse into her traumatic upbringing, including her father starving himself to death, her brother who had schizophrenia committing suicide, as well as her mother having DID. And this to me establishes the two main themes in this film. Firstly, the theme of dysfunctional family dynamics, and also the theme of tragedy. And it's these two elements that really make this film come alive, far more so than the horror elements, which I will expand on a little later. Annie is a miniature artist. She creates these teeny tiny little replicas of various scenes and moments. Her latest project isn't going so well, and she's getting the pressure from her art gallery to finish it, and it's the stress of the situation that causes her to tell her son Peter to take his 13-year-old sister to the party he's going to, which seems like terrible parenting, really. So they get to the party and Peter goes upstairs to smoke weed with his friends, and meanwhile Charlie's downstairs. She has a piece of cake with nuts in it and goes into anaphylactic shock. So while Peter rushes down the road to get to a hospital, she's in the back seat struggling to breathe, and she pops her head out the window in an attempt to get more air. Suddenly Peter swerves to not hit an animal that's lying in the middle of the road, and as he does so he goes past a light pole, but unfortunately, because Charlie's got her head outside the window, her head comes into contact with the pole and it decapitates her. The scene that happens after this moment is probably one of the best scenes in the entire film for me. Peter brings his car to a complete stop, and there's maybe a 3-minute scene that's just focused on his face as he realizes what's happened and goes into a state of complete shock. And I think this scene is brilliantly directed, focusing on Peter's immediate reaction where he probably knows what's happened but doesn't really want to face it, and we as the audience are kind of in the same boat. We can see what's happened, but we haven't actually physically viewed the outcome of the scenario as yet. The shock causes him to slowly, almost calmly actually, drive home, park the car and then go to bed, and then the next morning he lies in bed and listens as he hears his mother discover the body. And again, this is such a powerful moment. Here is a kid who is so deeply traumatized by what's happening that he just lays there unflinching as he hears the screams of his mother discovering the body of her child in their car. The screams she makes are horrendous, by the way. They're really, really chilling. After this happens, this theme of loss and grief really kicks into hyperdrive. So in the beginning of the film, we saw Annie struggle to connect to her grief as she mourned the loss of her mother, mainly because of this distant relationship that they had. But now with the daughter's death, you have 3 different people dealing with that grief and that loss in a very different way. Peter is in a wavering state of either complete numbness, where he's quite quiet and withdrawn, or otherwise he becomes almost childlike. He cries like a kid does, he asks his friend to hold his hand when he's suffering a panic attack, and he sobs loudly into his father's shoulder. The father, Steve, played by Gabriel Byrne, is almost the opposite in the way that he mourns. So he's obviously grieving, but he goes about his day like normal. He comforts Annie and Peter and acts like the backbone in the family, and you get a sense that this is the way it's been for most of their lives. Annie, on the other hand, deals with the situation exactly how you'd expect a grieving mother to. She is completely torn apart by this. There's a really fantastic scene where they're at the dinner table and she gets into a fight with Peter about what's happened, but she doesn't blame him. She acknowledges that it was an accident, but she's mad at Peter for not acknowledging the same. She says to Peter, something good could have come from this. This could have brought our family together. But obviously instead the situation is only causing greater distance between each of these family members. Also, Toni Collette's acting in this film is just phenomenal, and in particular this scene is flawless. I really hope that she gets nominated for an Oscar for this film because she totally deserves it. Annie meets a woman named Joan, played by Ann Dowd, at the support group, and she connects with Joan because Joan tells her that she lost her son and grandson a number of months earlier. This leads to Annie and Joan conducting a seance, during which time Joan's grandson son presents himself by moving a glass across the table and writing a message out on a chalkboard. We later find out that Joan is not what she seems. She's not the innocent, nice, sweet lady trying to be supportive, and in fact she is part of a satanic cult, of which Annie's mother was the leader. Annie goes home believing what she's seen is real and tries to conduct a seance of her own in an attempt to contact Charlie, but what she's actually doing, unbeknownst to her, is chanting a ritual that allows access for the demon to enter into her family home. And obviously after this happens, things get real messed up. Peter starts to hallucinate and smashes his own face into his desk at school, which causes him to break his nose. Annie finds a decomposing headless corpse of her mother in the attic, which is very gross, and one of Charlie's sketchbooks comes to life and starts to draw pages and pages and pages of pictures of Peter crying. Things are going down in the Graham household. The last 15 minutes of this film is where it turns from a family drama into a horror, and is also where this film started to go downhill for me personally. Annie throws the book of drawings into the fireplace, which causes her husband to burst into flames and burn to death. Annie herself then gets possessed and chases her son around the house and eventually into the attic. So he's in the attic begging her to stop, and she's furiously banging her head against the attic door, and then out of nowhere she appears in the attic with him, levitating above the ground, and she starts to decapitate herself with piano wire. A cupboard door in the attic opens, and inside is a weird naked man, which gives Peter enough of a fright that he jumps out the window and falls either to his death or he's just unconscious. I'm not actually entirely sure. A globe of light enters into Peter's body, signaling that the demon has taken over his new host, and Peter gets up and follows his mum's decapitated, levitating body up into the treehouse. There he finds some more naked people and some not as naked people, and they're all worshipping this statue with the body of a demon and his sister's decomposing gross head on top. His mother and grandmother's headless bodies are also positioned so that they're bowing down to the statue, and as he stands there they all start to worship him as the demon. The problem that I had with the last 15 minutes is not only the tonal shift but also the imagery and the elements used to make this a horror film. There are definitely some really creepy things in this movie, don't get me wrong. For example, when Peter breaks his nose, right before that happens, his face goes all kind of distorted and gross, and he makes this noise that's kind of like an animal growl, and that sent shivers through my spine. But the big scare moments, like when Annie is possessed and she scurries away on the ceiling kind of like an animal, these moments often were quite comical and very cheesy. The naked people as well, there's the one that's in the cupboard in the attic, but there's also a couple that are standing watching Peter as he walks towards the treehouse, and I assume they're members of the cult, but these additions were not creepy or scary at all. In fact, the theatre where I watched this, people were genuinely laughing at these moments. I feel like the horror element in Hereditary can be split into two sections. On the one hand, you've got the typical kind of horror tropes, like when Peter looks at his reflection in a glass cabinet and his reflection is smiling back at him. And then on the other hand, you've got this unsettling kind of creepy imagery, like when the headless bodies are bowing down to the Satan statue. For me, this movie would have worked much better as a horror if they had just focused on the creepy side of it and got rid of the cliches altogether. And the horror needed to kick in a lot sooner than it did. So I'm really in two minds about how to rate Hereditary. As a drama, it is phenomenal. The casting was perfect, the performances were amazing. I heard a lot of people say they didn't like the son and his performance, but I actually thought he was great. I believed every single emotion that he was putting forward. The cinematography, sound design, and directing are all fantastic. There are some really great shots in this. So as a drama, I'd probably rate this somewhere around the 9 mark. As a horror, however, this is sadly an easy 5 for me. I didn't like most of the aspects, there were lots of cliched moments, and unfortunately the horror was actually quite underutilized. So it probably makes sense then as a whole that I rate this movie between those 2 marks. So I'm going to give Hereditary a 7 out of 10. It is interesting though, talking to people on Instagram and friends that have seen the film, as well as watching reviews online, because there really is such a split in the audience for this movie. I think this is a movie movie for the critics and people that like more depth to their cinematic experience rather than like true horror fans. I'd love to know your thoughts though on Hereditary, which you can pop in the comment section below. Do you pronounce it Hereditary or Hereditary? Let me know. You can follow me on Facebook and Instagram over here, or click the red button over here if you liked this video. You'll really make my day if you do. Thanks as always for watching. I will see you here for the next one. Caw-caw!